Hi everyone, Professor King here. In this video, I'm going to be talking about notes on general theoretical research. I do want to let you all know that we do have a guest visitor for this video who might be making herself known because she's decided to sit right next to me on the other side of this laptop. So I just want to introduce all of you. This is my dog Coleslaw. She's very camera shy, so that's why she kind of moves away right when the camera's in her face. But if there's any like moving of the laptop or like sudden like kind of like a quick bark or something, it's that one. I was doing my best to teach, without interruption, like that, like my neighbor's setting off fireworks. But clearly like that's not going to happen. So I want to get through these notes. They're going to be pretty quickly, so I don't think we'll get too many interruptions, but just thank you for bearing with me. I'll take it to the share screen so that we can talk about these notes. I just want to make sure that I have the proper notes on the screen first before I go to the share screen. Okay, and here we go. Last time we talked about intertextual research. So if you remember, our last slide looked like this. So today we're going to be looking at theoretical research. And I'm going to be talking about why we use it before I talk about what it is. We've already been doing it in our 104 class, or if this is 103 or 100, we've probably hit the point where we've started to do some of this stuff. So why? Well, first of all, to understand, analyze, and design ways to investigate relationships within social systems, right? So a lot of theory has to do with how we look at the world, how we look at society, how we look at systems within society, and how not just individual relationships, but group relationships, whether that be people to people, whether that be the state to an individual, whether that be even like an individual with herself, right? We want to kind of put on a theoretical lens and find a new way of looking at that. The lens is a great metaphor for theory because if you think about like sunglasses, right? Like if you just look around you right now, without your sunglasses on. And then think about like if you put on your sunglasses, maybe they're like a gray tint, maybe they're like a brown tint, right? The world looks different once you put those sunglasses on, right? It's dimmer, probably. It puts a gray tint to everything. It filters out certain colors, right? And creates a different color spectrum. Like in other words, putting on those sunglasses of that gray color make the world look differently than you had previously perceived without those lenses, right? In the same way, if you then took those sunglasses off and put on new lenses that were perhaps blue tinted, it would still be the world in front of you, right? There'd still be like the trees and the street and your dog or whatever else is in your field of vision, but it would all be tinted differently, right? There would be a slightly different take on it. So that's kind of when we think about applying different theories, think about that lens as metaphor. We also use theoretical research to identify important new issues and prescribe the most critical research questions that need to be answered to maximize understanding of the issue. So one of the great things that I love about theory is that it is so contemporary, that it talks about, a lot of people say like in literature, like how am I ever going to use this in real life? And theory to me is the place where we get to apply some of these really cool real life concepts to a variety of things, right? To literature, to film, to the way we look at government and documents and, history and all these other things. So we can do that, right? Maybe the least fun one that has to do with theory is that common language of theory. For those of us who've read a few theoretical texts now, we're realizing that common theoretical language is not so common for us, right? That it's very esoteric, it's very kind of different than what we're used to. But what it does, just like with any language, is it includes and excludes, right? It creates a frame of reference for defining the boundaries of a particular field of study, and it lets you know that other fields of study are kind of not what are going to be discussed or included, right? So for example, if I were talking about feminist theory, I'd be using words like maybe patriarchy or cis heteronormativity or female liberation, right? Trans inclusivity, right? Because those all have to do with feminist theory. However, they don't have a whole lot to do with things like distant reading theory, right? So in that case, we'd be talking about things like aggregates, right? Or axes or, spatial relationships. So each theoretical field has its own set of language, and then kind of the larger general field of theory uses specific language that we have to know, right? And then finally, we use theoretical research to guide and inform what we're doing, so that ultimately when we create solid research, other people will read it and it'll help them, right? And then we become part of the scholarly community. We encourage scholarly practice, right? All the things we should be doing. We further knowledge. So what is it? Well, most of us probably have like a pretty decent idea of what it is. But here's kind of the brass tacks, right? Theories are formulated to explain, predict, and understand phenomena, just meaning like things or happenings within a given society. And in many cases, theories are meant to challenge and extend existing knowledge within the limits of critical or critically bounding assumptions. So, if I'm going to use feminist theory as an example, right, the feminist theory of 2020 is not the feminist theory of Betty Friedan in the 1960s, right? The way that we look at society, the way that our society is, the way that our culture is, all of those things are dynamic, meaning they change. And so that's, again, another reason why I love theory so much, is because it allows us to look at the way things are going on in this moment and to formulate why that is, right? And to think about ways of viewing the world. The theoretical framework itself is the structure that can hold or support a theory of a research study. And it introduces and describes the theory that explains why the research problem under study exists, right? So, for example, like new criticism, which is like a long, old, theoretical school. It's not dead because we still do it, but it's like very old. In new criticism, we need close readings of texts. And the reason why we need close readings of texts, according to new criticism, the school of new criticism, is, the problem under inquiry is the meaning of the text, right? Like what the author's doing, what the text means, why certain turns of phrase or certain words, what they contribute or take away from the text, et cetera, right? And so, that's kind of what we're doing with that field, even though we're not aware, because we're so used to just doing close reading as a knee-jerk reaction. We're not aware that comes out of a school of theory. It is a means of describing and introducing, right, these concepts, i.e. close reading, that interrogate a text, right? And that provide an impetus as to why we're studying that text. So we've got tons of types of theoretical research. And actually, if you look at your Norton Critical Anthology, for those of you in English 104, if you look at your textbook, right, at the beginning of the textbook, it separates readings by different schools of theory. It's one of the ways that it separates it. So the ones that I have listed here, these don't even scratch the surface of all the types of theoretical research there are. And there were so many more that I wanted to include in the class that just, reasons of time and length got away from me. But if this is stuff that interests you and you're going on to be an English major, or even if you're not, you know, and you just think this stuff is cool, right? Here are some to consider. There's gender theory, there's queer theory, there's post-colonial theory, critical race theory, Marxist theory, Freudian, or what has also been called psychoanalytic theory, post-structuralist theory. A relatively new one that's come about in the last 10 years is called distant reading theory. If you look to the right here, this is a very 21st century school of theory in that it has to use things like complex computation systems, a sort of macro approach to literature, very high level sort of math and technology in looking at things like literary texts. Some of you may have seen like word clouds, you know, where you maybe put in a whole poem or even a whole book. You can like cut and paste a whole book into a word cloud, and then it shows you by the size of the word which one shows up the most in the text. That's kind of a byproduct of distant reading theory, or it's very closely related to it. And that, you know, using that sort of, again, that large scale macro mathematical way of looking at a text, as opposed to the old close reading model, right, where you had to look at every single word within the text. Now we're doing things like looking at the titles of 30,000 novels from the Victorian period to see what the average word length of a title was, right? Or how often the trope of like, you know, a guy living in the poor side of town has an affair with a wealthy woman, right? So like these very mathematical kind of large scale ways of researching, right? So an example, there we go. An example here, right, is like looking at all of the relationships in Hamlet and who interacts with whom, right? And if those are sort of central characters in terms of their interactions with one another and with other characters within the play, and kind of where those interactions happen, and who has the most interactions, clearly like Hamlet and Claudius, right? And you know, like how we can kind of see the layout from a statistical point of view of what the story looks like, as opposed to like a close reading. So theoretical research is really cool. And you can do, you know, there's game theory where like that comes out of UCLA, where you can apply sort of like, you know, the rules and the expectations of like games, particularly like this comes out of like video gaming, right? And how we can apply that to our reading of text or our reading of society. So there's all kinds of cool theoretical schools of research. Like these are just like scratching the surface. So keep that in mind. Okay, where do we engage in theoretical research? Clearly, right, you have the textbook, and there are so many readings in the textbook that are not covered in the class. And so if you want to challenge yourself, you know, or you want to look at a particular school of theory, a good place to start is in that table of contents where you can look by, you know, type of theory, right? Particularly readings that we didn't do in the class. Clearly, you can get library books. In this case, since we're in quarantine right now, it would be like ebooks that you can get from library.fullcall.edu. Also, you can get scholarly journal articles and specific university websites from library.fullcall.edu. And you can even put in the terminology that you find, right, from the theoretical, from the school theory, right? So like, if Marxist theory has to do with, those of you who've seen the Foucault PowerPoint, if Marxist theory has to do with things like labor and capital, you know, you could use those words to potentially, you know, in an application of them to a poem you're reading or a novel you're reading, and maybe find some journal articles with those keywords. You may want to use Wikipedia as a springboard source. Only do not, please don't break my heart and use Wikipedia in your works cited, or like any of those like Spark Notes or you know, like summary synopses pages of a text, like please, 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 please don't use those in your works cited. Not just because it breaks my heart and I'm a very sensitive feeling person, but also because it's not going to bode well for your grade if you do that, because you need to find scholarly level research. But I also understand that theory is really challenging. And so if you're like starting out like, okay, Freudian theory, right? Psychoanalytic theory, here we go. And then you start reading it and you're like, what is going on? You can start by dipping your teeny tiny toe in the water and go to Wikipedia and go, what is the, like what's kind of the 3-paragraph blurb about Freudian psychoanalytic theory, right? As it pertains to literature. And then from there, you'll find some terms, right? Some theoretical terms that might help you that you could then use as keywords when you go to the scholarly journal websites. But again, do not use Wikipedia as anything other than a springboard source. And by a springboard source, I mean, again, like if you're stuck, if you need like, what does this word mean kind of clarification, and then you get it, and then you go to the scholarly website. And then the last thing I would say is you can even go to social media to engage in theoretical research. Some of my favorite social media accounts have to do with theoretical research. There's a really, really cool one that I highly recommend if you like this stuff. I did not pick the name, so please don't be offended. But it's R.I.P. Anna Nicole Smith. I don't know why, but it's a woman from Canada. I believe she's from the Montreal area, and she does these really cool, like, she used to do more of these really cool, like, movie stills and then kind of superimposing theoretical quotes over them to make it kind of like, this one's from Legally Blonde, and or she kind of applies the theory and changes the dialogue of the film so you can read it. So it's Elle saying to Vivian, like, Warner has us both as reified objects and that we have different feminine gendered performances. So then we are pitted against each other to satisfy and externalize his narcissistic and misogynistic drive, right? Like that one's clearly like very feminist theory. But it's kind of cool, like, I don't know, stuff like that. And then another one, this one on the bottom here, is one that I love called Saved by the Bell Hooks. It's a website, Saved by the Bell Hooks. Clearly it's not a portmanteau because it's actual full words, but it's a combination, a play on words of the television show, the 90s television show, Saved by the Bell, right? And then incorporating the theoretical quotes from feminist and critical race theorist Bell Hooks. And class theorists too. So like, for example, it's Zach and some other guy. It's not AC Slater, but somebody else. Maybe it was the guy who played, maybe he might have played Slater in the first season before Mario Lopez came to the show. Either way, they're walking away from this, like, clearly like authority figure, maybe a teacher or person of color, and it says, white supremacy has taught him that all people of color are threats irrespective of their behavior. So it's like this Bell Hooks quote, kind of sillily on this thing. So you can find theory everywhere is what I'm saying. And it's, it's academic and it's rigorous, but it can also be used in kind of these really cool pop culture ways, which I absolutely love. So that's it for theoretical research. We've got 2 down. We've still got 2 to go as in terms of humanities research that we're talking about, particularly in this class. But I hope that helped. I hope it made sense. I hope it helps for your essay and for anything else you want to do in your life. And Coleslaw left. So I hope you all have Coleslaw's my dog, by the way. I hope you all have a great night, and I'll see you in cyberspace. Okay, bye.